The market buzzed with life, a blend of colors, sounds, and scents that could only exist on a neutral trading outpost like Sarin 4. Eris Vane moved through the crowd like a shadow, her slight frame and nondescript clothing aiding her in her attempt to remain invisible. She kept her hood up, masking the faded scar running along her temple, a relic from a life she had abandoned. Her posture was relaxed but deliberate, every step placed with a precision that betrayed her constant vigilance. This was not a woman simply browsing market stalls. This was someone trained to notice everything without being noticed herself. Her human features drew a few curious glances from passers-by, but no one lingered. The outpost was a melting pot of species, each more strange and imposing than the next. Yet Eris, with her quiet demeanor and unassuming nature, managed to blend into the chaos. She clutched a small trinket she'd purchased, something simple but meaningful, a reminder of the life she was trying to build. But her peace would not last. The first insult came as she passed the towering Vorax leaning against a stall. Its leathery skin gleamed under the artificial sunlight, and its sharp fangs glinted as it sneered at her. "Humans are so fragile," it said in its guttural voice, loud enough for Eris to hear. She ignored it and kept walking, but the Vorax wasn't done. "Hey, little human!" Another one chimed in, stepping into her path. This one was bulkier, with claws that tapped menacingly against its armored torso. "Lost? Or just looking for someone to carry you back to your ship when your weak legs give out?" The Vorax laughed, their voices a mix of growls and hisses. Eris's grip on her trinket tightened, but her expression remained neutral. Her calm demeanor only seemed to embolden them. The crowd around her began to thin as bystanders moved aside, either unwilling or afraid to get involved. A few lingered at a safe distance, their curiosity piqued by the unfolding scene. "What's wrong?" the first Vorax mocked, circling her like a predator. "Cat got your tongue, or did they forget to teach you how to speak in that backward little planet of yours?" Eris didn't respond. She stood still, her eyes scanning her surroundings. Her calmness wasn't submission, it was calculation. The Vorax didn't notice the way her shoulders shifted ever so slightly, how her weight subtly redistributed to her back foot, ready for action. They didn't notice her breathing slow, becoming measured and deliberate. But one of the bystanders did. A young alien, small and timid, tugged at the sleeve of another bystander and whispered, "Something's different about her." The Vorax were too consumed by their game to notice the whispers. One of them stepped closer, invading Eris's personal space. Its claws reached out and flicked the trinket from her hand, sending it clattering to the ground. "Oops," it said with mock innocence. "How clumsy of me." A murmur ran through the crowd as Eris bent down to pick up the trinket. Her hand trembled, not from fear, but from the effort it took to suppress the surge of instincts screaming at her to act. Memories flickered in her mind like flashes of light. Battlefields scorched with plasma fire, the sound of her voice commanding troops, the respect in their eyes as they followed her orders without hesitation. She exhaled slowly and straightened, clutching the trinket to her chest. The young alien from before tried to step forward, a feeble attempt to intervene. "Leave her alone!" it cried, its voice barely rising above the Vorax's laughter. The bulkier Vorax turned and snarled, swatting the alien aside like it was an insect. The child stumbled but was caught by an older member of its species, who pulled it back into the safety of the crowd. "Know your place," the Vorax growled. Eris's patience was fraying. Her gaze shifted to the child, then back to her tormentors. Her breathing, once controlled, became shallow and sharp. The weight of her past bore down on her, the echoes of a life she had tried to leave behind colliding with the present. She took one step forward, her eyes meeting the lead Vorax's for the first time. "You should walk away," she said, her voice steady but carrying an edge that cut through the din of the marketplace. The lead Vorax hesitated for a fraction of a second, its instincts warning it of something it couldn't quite place. But arrogance won out, and it smirked. "And what's a little human like you going to do if we don't?" The question hung in the air, and for the first time, the crowd fell completely silent. The lead Vorax stepped closer, sneering as it loomed over Eris. Its clawed hand reached out, and snatched the trinket from her grasp. With deliberate malice, it crushed the fragile object in its palm, the shards of metal and glass falling to the ground. "Does that hurt, little human?" it jeered, leaning closer, its fanged smile widening. "Or are you too weak to care?" The crowd gasped, the sound rippling through the marketplace like a wave. A palpable shift in the air made even the most curious onlookers take a cautious step back. The young alien who had tried to intervene earlier clung to its guardian, eyes wide with fear. The Vorax, however, remained oblivious to the unease, their arrogance blinding them to the growing tension. Eris didn't move. Her gaze lingered on the crushed remains of the trinket, her jaw tightening. A flicker of emotion passed through her eyes, grief, anger, something deeper, and then it was gone, replaced by an icy calm. Her hand twitched at her side, fingers curling slightly as if remembering the feel of a weapon's hilt. A memory surged to the surface, unbidden but vivid. She was back on the battlefield, the sky ablaze with streaks of plasma fire. Her voice cut through the chaos, sharp and commanding. "Hold the line! Focus fire on the eastern flank!" Around her, soldiers scrambled to execute her orders, their trust in her absolute. They were outnumbered, outgunned, but Eris had seen the flaw in the enemy's formation. It was a gamble, but it was the only chance they had. She led the charge herself, her blade carving a path through the enemy ranks. The Allied forces rallied behind her, their morale surging as they watched her fight with a precision and ferocity unmatched on either side of the war. Victory had seemed impossible, but by the time the dust settled, Eris Vane's name was etched into history as the architect of one of humanity's greatest triumphs. But that victory came at a cost. The faces of the fallen haunted her dreams, their sacrifices a constant reminder of the price of leadership. It was why she'd walked away, why she'd chosen exile over fame. Peace was all she wanted now, peace and anonymity. Yet here she was, dragged back into the fray by the same arrogance she'd fought against all her life. The memory dissolved, and Eris refocused on the present. Her eyes locked onto the lead Vorax, their mocking laughter grating against her nerves. "You should have stopped," she said, her voice low but carrying an edge that silenced the immediate area. The Vorax chuckled, mistaking her calm for fear. "Or what? You'll cry?" It gestured to its companions, who closed in, their towering forms casting long shadows over her. "You don't know who I am," Eris continued, her tone steady. The words were not a plea but a statement of fact. "And that's your first mistake." The crowd murmured, some faces lighting up with recognition. Whispers began to spread, rippling outward like a growing tide. "Could it be?" someone muttered. Another voice chimed in, hesitant but certain. "Eris Vane, the commander of the Iron Rebellion." The Vorax faltered for just a moment, their smug confidence cracking. But the lead one scoffed, shaking its head. "Legends don't hide in market stalls. You're no one. Just another weak human." Eris tilted her head slightly, a ghost of a smirk playing at her lips. "You've been warned," she said simply. Her posture shifted, her weight moving to the balls of her feet. The subtle change didn't go unnoticed by the crowd, and those who had lingered began to edge further back. The lead Vorax growled, stepping closer still, until it was mere inches from her. Its companions mirrored the motion, their muscles coiling as they prepared to strike. The air grew heavier, every breath feeling charged with the anticipation of what was to come. Some in the crowd whispered for the bullies to stop, others watched in stunned silence, unwilling to intervene but unable to look away. Tension reached its breaking point as the Vorax surrounded Eris, their arrogance driving them toward a mistake they would soon regret. The lead Vorax lunged first, its massive arms swinging down toward Eris with the force of a sledgehammer. The crowd flinched, expecting her to be crushed, but she wasn't there. Eris moved like a whisper, sidestepping the blow with fluid grace. Her foot shot out, connecting with the Vorax's knee in a precise strike. The alien roared in pain, its leg buckling as it staggered backward. The second Vorax charged, claws extended, its speed impressive for its bulk. Eris didn't retreat. She stepped forward, closing the distance before it could adjust. Grabbing its outstretched arm, she twisted with a sharp motion, using its momentum against it. The alien crashed into the ground, dazed, its claws skidding across the dirt. The third bully hesitated, its confidence visibly shaken, but it forced itself to attack. It went for a grapple, arms outstretched to overpower her with brute strength. Eris ducked low, slipping beneath its grasp and driving her elbow into its ribcage. The force of the blow sent it reeling, clutching its side as it gasped for air. Eris straightened, her movements measured and calm. She didn't go for a killing blow, there was no need. Each strike she delivered was deliberate, designed to incapacitate without unnecessary harm. The lead Vorax recovered enough to charge again, this time roaring with blind rage. It swiped wildly, its claws carving through the air, but Eris was already behind it. With a swift motion, she swept its legs out from under it, sending it sprawling face first into the dirt. The fight lasted less than a minute. When it was over, the Vorax lay scattered around her, groaning in pain, their arrogance shattered. Eris stood in the center of the circle they had formed, her breathing steady, her stance relaxed. She looked down at them, her expression unreadable, before finally speaking. Strength isn't about size or bluster. It's about knowing when to act, and when to stop. The crowd, which had been frozen in stunned silence, erupted. Whispers raced through the gathered aliens. Did you see that? She didn't even break a sweat. Who is she? The murmurs grew louder as recognition began to spread. That's Eris Vane. It has to be. No one else moves like that. A young alien stepped forward from the crowd, the same child who had tried to intervene earlier. It looked up at her with wide, awestruck eyes. Thank you, it said softly, its voice trembling with both gratitude and admiration. Eris crouched to its level, her voice gentle as she replied, Sometimes it's braver to stand up for others than it is to fight. She placed a hand on its shoulder briefly before rising again. The atmosphere shifted, reverence replacing the earlier hostility. The Vorax struggled to their feet, their bravado gone. They didn't dare meet her eyes as they limped away, dragging their wounded pride behind them. The crowd parted to let them pass, the silence heavy with judgment. Eris scanned the faces around her, noting the mix of awe, fear, and respect. She didn't want this. She had fought for years to leave her past behind, to be forgotten. But in this moment, she knew there was no escaping it. Her actions had made a statement, whether she wanted them to or not. She bent down to retrieve the shards of her broken trinket, brushing them into her palm with care. As she straightened, she addressed the crowd, her voice carrying a quiet authority that silenced even the whispers. Strength isn't about proving you're better than someone else. It's about protecting those who can't protect themselves. Remember that. The crowd lingered, watching as she turned and walked away. Eris didn't look back. Her steps were steady, but her mind was heavy with conflicting emotions. She had sought peace, a life where she could exist without the shadow of her past. Yet here she was, once again the symbol of humanity's resilience. As she exited the marketplace, she paused briefly, looking up at the stars visible through the station's domed ceiling. They seemed both endless and unattainable. With a quiet sigh, she continued on her way, vanishing into the labyrinth of the outpost. Behind her, whispers of her name spread further, the story of her actions already evolving into legend. Eris Vane, the hidden war hero, had reminded the galaxy why humanity could never be underestimated. And though she longed for anonymity, she couldn't help but feel a faint glimmer of pride in the message she had left behind.